Well, let's take a look at pine reproduction because pine reproduction is so cool. What's cool about it? It takes 2 years. So what? A lot of things take 2 years. No, what takes place in the first year and the second year are so different. It's just uh, very striking. And also, it helps us understand seed plants, which also helps us understand the concept of heterospory. So you'll recall seed plants are gymnosperms are seed plants. And this slide from a textbook has a striking sentence at the top of it. It says a pine tree is a sporophyte with gametophytes in its cones. One stage of the life cycle in another stage? Actually, it's even could be more surprising than that because they're actually sporophytes within the sporophytes. We will see how. So I made these sketches that sort of show the concepts of different types of plants with respect to that thing called homospory or heterospory. So here's a sketch of a homosporous plant. Like mosses and other bryophytes, like most ferns, including horsetails, like some lycopods, particularly the lycopodium types, but not the selaginella types. And unlike other lycopods, namely the selaginella types, and especially important, unlike all seed plants are not homosporous. But a plant that's homosporous produces sporangia that are all more or less alike, and the spores develop into typically, bisexual gametophytes. They're simultaneously male and female, and there's no difference between the spores, homosporous. A plant that's heterosporous, you will recall, produces two types of sporangia, what are called microsporangia, which have small spores that develop into male gametophytes, which are usually smaller, separate from the female gametophytes. They develop as a result of what are called megasporangia, within which are larger megaspores, and they develop into female gametophytes, two separate sized spores that develop into male and female gametophytes respectively. And that's a plant that's heterosporous. Seed plants carry this a bit further. So here's a diagram of what a seed plant is like. Seed plants have microspores that develop into pollen, and pollen, by the way, are male gametophytes. They also produce megaspores, and two things that are striking about what seed plants do. One of the things is that there's actually only one megaspore within the sporangium, one functional megaspore. So the megasporangium, one spore instead of a bunch of them. The other thing that's special about it is that it's not released. It's retained within the sporangium. So within the sporangium, the megaspore develops into what they develop into female gametophytes. So still contained within the sporangium is a female gametophyte, which contains an egg, or more, actually. And when fertilization takes place, the new embryo develops still within that sporangium. It becomes what is called a seed, and there's the embryo sporophyte. So it's not only the gametophyte that's within the sporophyte's tissues, but actually it's the next generation of sporophytes. So that's what seed plants do. They're extremely heterosporous, and the female gametophyte is retained within the megasporangium. So let's take a look at that exciting thing about pine reproduction. So here's a diagram that you have, we hope, to label. And what I'd like to do is show you, now these slides from a textbook that I should properly have cited are look a little more too detailed, but let's look at the essential features. So here's a sporophyte, and one of the things that it does, a pine tree, is it produces pollen in little cones. I'll show you some pictures of these later. They're bunched together, and there's spiral arrangements of sporangia, a little strobilus kind of thing. Meiosis takes place to produce pollen grains, and pollen grains are actually male gametophytes. And at the time that the pollen is being developed on trees, within those little pollen cones, the precursors of what we think of what are actually pine cones develop. And what happens is wind blows the pollen, that's pollination. Wind pollination blows the pollen to a little sticky spot that's at the base of the megasporangium. Notice that the megasporangium at this point is still a sporangium. It's diploid tissue. It has a cell that's called a spore mother cell that will give rise to spores. Eventually, it'll just become one spore. And the male gametophytes are fully, completely developed. The female side of the equation here, it's still a spore. Not even a spore. It's still a cell that's going to develop into a spore. So after pollination has occurred, in other words, in the early spring of the first year, meiosis takes place within the female sporangium and develops into a spore, which develops into a female gametophyte. And within the young pine cones, there is a female gametophyte, which does what female gametophytes do. They contain an egg. And this is finally complete at the beginning of the second year. So this is present in the second spring. Pollination took place in, say, 2018, and fertilization took place in 2019. And these seeds develop a zygote and develop an embryo and have a food supply and a seed coat. They might be released into the environment at the end of 2019 or the beginning of 2020. It takes 2 years for pine reproduction to occur, but the especially cool thing about it, I'm reviewing here, is that pollination takes place a whole year before fertilization takes place, and these patient pollen grains just sit around and will wait for their spouse to become mature, to actually become into being. Amazing. So here is our diagram. And I can't write on this. I wish I could, but it just never works. But this would represent meiosis in the male microsporangia. These are pollen grains. B is pollen grains, which are actually male gametophytes. D is a cell that's going to give rise to the megaspore, and it's called a spore mother cell. That was D. Did I say it was D? C, of course, is the sporangium, within which that spore mother cell is going to give rise to a spore. This is meiosis, again, because this is the female part of the life cycle. And here in the gametophyte are some eggs. Seems to be more than one. Surprise. There are, and notice the pollen grain is here. It's been patiently waiting for a whole year. That's what H is, the pollen grain. That's the male gametophyte. G is the sperm. And I is representing the female gametophyte, which is now mature. A year after pollination has taken place, fertilization takes place, and we have a fertilized egg, a zygote, which finally develops into a diploid sporophyte and a seed coat and some nutritive tissue, which is what a seed is. Pine reproduction, it takes 2 years. The first year pollination takes place, and the female gametophyte hasn't even been developed yet. The second year it is ready, and fertilization takes place. Boom. Let's take a look at some pictures of this. This is a pine called scrub pine, and this is a mature cone that's 2 years old or more, that's opened and released its seeds. And here's a pretty little picture of some pine needles. And this is spent pollen cones. So this is late in the first year of this pollen producing branch. And here is a young cone a little bit into the first year. So here's a picture that shows some pollen cones and a seed cone. I misspoke it before. I think I said pollen cone. A seed cone near at the beginning of the second year. So this was a little tiny thing last year, and now it's actually fertilization is taking place. And here is a cone that's 2 years old. Here's some pine trees. This pine tree shows a male cones, 1-year-old female cones, and here at the tippy top are the female cones of the current year. This is a close-up. And these are have a little sticky area where the pollen can attach and just hang out for a whole year before this female cone becomes mature enough to contain mature gametophytes, a 2-year life cycle. So here is a 1-year-old cone, and here's a 0-year-old cone, the cone of the current season. Here's another one. Here's another one. And there on the ground are some 2-year-old cones. There might be some on the tree still. Here's white pine. These are male cones of white pine. And right about the time that they're releasing their pollen, this is what the female cones to be look like. And they're spiral arrangements with sporangia, with a little zone that can be sticky and have the pollen attach. And then a year later, when the female gametophyte is ready, fertilization takes place. And this is, I'm going to close on an editorial comment. This is the falsest advertising ever. This is a little sort of aromatic, what do you call that? Well, air freshener that I saw at a grocery store, gas station, whatever you call those things, you know. And for one thing, this picture here is not pine. These are single needles, and the cones are descending. This is not royal pine. This is spruce. Number 2, the smell that it has is not spruce, because spruces are notorious for smelling kind of like feline urine. And so what it probably smells like, the nice, fragrant, beautiful, nice-smelling conifer, is fir. So it's like, okay, got it, not pine, picture of spruce, and it's actually fake fir. Fake fir, that's funny.